in 2007, there was every year, but in 2007 I was invited to speak at the German-Australian Science Week, and the meeting was held at QUT, and I gave a talk about soybean. And if you remember, in 2007 the petrol prices went very high. I mean, they went up to $1.50, $1.70, small compared to now. But it was a real political issue, the high petrol prices and diesel prices. And so I spoke about our work on soybean, nodulation and control, and RNA and DNA and so on, right? And I figured I would be a bit trendy and up to date. And in the last 5 minutes I said, wouldn't it be nice actually to use a legume like soybean, which produces 20% oil. You're all familiar with soy oil, you know, for eating, and maybe utilize that oil as a sustainable biofuel. And just simply to have engines run on it, or convert it to jet fuel, or convert it to diesel, and so on, but ultimately make a storable energy source of it. And you know, everybody clapped, and I went out to my car, and I got a telephone call. And the person, a man called George Muirhead, in the Caboolture area, George said, Peter, it was a good talk, but you're speaking about the wrong organism. You shouldn't use a plant which is being used to feed humans, right, in order to run cars, right? So food and biofuel should not be on the same plane. And so I said, yeah, I agree, but which alternative do you have? And he said, you should work with Pongamia. And I said, what? I never heard of Pongamia. That's like most of you have probably never heard of Pongamia before. And so George said, well, would you be interested to do some research just to see what's possible? And I said, yes, we have a lot of money, but everybody is employed for a project, and so you can't really do it on the side. And we would need somebody dedicated for it. And so he gave me $75,000 for half a year to hire a person. And so once you had a technician to do the work that's needed, we got germination data and DNA data and RNA and protein and, you know, things, oil content and things like that. And he was very, very happy with the outcome, and so he gave me $1 million. And so, which for 3 years, right? He and his partner called Gary Seaton, who maybe some of you know. Anyway, I will tell you how it went on from then. I mean, this was the beginning, you know. Suddenly, because of a quick publicity type of comment at the end of a lecture, in order to make it politically worthwhile and so on, it turned out to be a major research project. And I'm still very, very active in it, although not in terms of real research like laboratory research or greenhouse research, but in the area of consultancy, because companies have discovered it and governments have discovered it. And so therefore I have a lot of meetings with government people, but also I'm doing a lot of consultancy for big companies, and some of them are as big. One of them is Mitsubishi, so this is big. Another one is called NOLA, which probably none of you have heard of. I hadn't heard of it, but it's the largest petrochemical company in Japan. So it's a really, really big energy producer. There's also a lot of interest now coming out of Europe, because the European Union has passed legislation to support reforestation, which is wonderful. I mean, we all are in favor of reforestation, and the reforestation has to be with oil-producing trees. And so suddenly Pongamia stands as number one, and it's very relevant, not for Norway or Sweden or so, but for, you know, the Balkan and maybe Spain and Italy and so on. Anyway, I will tell you about some of the materials. So I'm sorry that I'm limping, but I fell off a bicycle and I have a sore knee. So I look like a cripple, but I'm not. Okay, this is my email address. Feel free to write to me if you want to have some papers, or if you want to have the copy of the slideshow, or you just want to discuss something, or if you even want to come around and look at the laboratory, because it's all of our tax money which is paying for your Q, right? So therefore it's actually, you know, we have joint ownership of all of this, right? So I'm very, very happy to show you around. This is a website for the center, Center for Integrated Legume Research, and some pretty pictures. Okay, next slide.
That's not fun.
Well, yesterday. Okay, so what will we touch on? What will we learn? Because indirectly you're going to learn something out of this, hopefully. And maybe I will learn something. We will very, very quickly speak about the global energy situation. We don't have to talk too much about it because everybody hears it on the news and things like that. And I want to highlight the need for sustainable energy production. And of course, again, we think about this. We think about solar and wind and even nuclear or hydroelectric and so on. And I want to highlight the need for a fuel, because fuel is stored energy, storable energy. And that is very, very useful. If you have a 747 or an Airbus airplane, you cannot have solar panels on it or batteries in order to fly it across the ocean. It's just simply impossible. Even if engineering advances 100-fold and so on. If you have an ocean liner, a tanker or a freighter or something like that, it needs to have fuel on board, a high energy density fuel, in order to make it across the ocean. Yes, you can put solar panels on it and you can get electrical energy for a lot of things, but not for the major transport, so you need fuel. And then what I want to speak just slightly, and just hinting at it, just simply the need of fuel versus food, and the areas like that, and land versus inputs and so on. But I want to then very, very quickly, this will take 5-10 minutes only. I want to start giving you some potential from this plant called Pongamia. And you all may be even familiar with Pongamia. I will show you some pictures, the flowers and the seed. And I have a bag there, as you can see. So in a little while, you won't see it yet, but in a little while there's some goodies coming out. And you can even take some seed home. And I will give you advice of how to germinate if you want to have a Pongamia tree in your garden. It grows beautifully in Brisbane, right? So it's nice. Now, and then thoughts, whatever. This is a free-for-all. As a matter of fact, you can interrupt wherever you want to because there's no exam at the end, right? And so we don't have a curriculum to go through in order to get to a certain spot. So, wherever the tension goes, and if the tension goes too far, I will control it and bring it back again and things like that. And questions, as I said, I'll go throughout. Okay, let's get it going. Very, very quickly, I think there's ample of data. I could show 5 hours worth of slides. The temperature in the world is going up, and there are numerous data graphs like this, where there's noise in between each year and so on, but ultimately the temperatures are going up. There are huge arguments about what we can do about it, how can we control emissions, but what is critical is what I've written here in red, I think, is we need to think, right? We need to think about what technology and what approach to use. And realistically, I think we have to think of a diet, right? If you think about your own nutrition, you don't only think about vitamins or minerals or so. You think about 20, 30 different things, and you eat them together. And I think the same should happen for an industrial society. We should have an energy diet. And depending on where you are, Switzerland is going to have a different diet than South Africa, and so on. And so we have to think about what are the solutions, and we have to think creatively, not just simply restricted by finances and so on. And the reason is we cannot afford to be incorrect. I think all of these processes are happening so slowly, yet fast enough that most of us here will still be alive to a worse off planet. The Earth is losing every year agricultural land. Did you know that? Right? There's the talk about deforestation in Indonesia and so on, and more land in Brazil and so on. But overall, there's less agricultural land every year. And the reason for it is urbanization and also salinification. Right? Salt is coming up in many places. So therefore, where wheat or so would grow 20 years ago, no longer you can have that. You have to have a meadow and have some cattle or sheep on it. So we have to think the right way, because if we think the wrong way, we may be in trouble. And there are global problems, and we're all familiar with them. I'm preaching to the converted. But I want to highlight that in my opinion, my personal opinion, the major problem that we have on the Earth is It's not an energy shortage or food shortage or war and peace and things like that. It's population increase, right? I mean, we just simply have already too many people on this planet. And there's no easy solution of getting rid of them. And there will be more. In the next 20 years, there will be another billion people. It will be 9 billion people, right? And it probably will even go to 10 billion. Yes, yes?
2 questions. So we're busily trying to explore the universe to find another planet that we can overpopulate and kill. And the other thing is, whilst there's no scarcity of food, there's a scarcity in certain countries.
That's right.
And there's the inequality.
That's right.
So how do we deal with those mindset?
Well, it all comes back to costs, right? I mean, yes, there's too much food in some places, and I feel bad when I throw things out of the fridge into the garbage can and so on because it's spoiled and so on, right? But the problem is that it is impossible to send Australian avocados to Uganda.
Sure.
I mean, just simply because of transport costs.
Sure, but the aid packages specifically send food that can be packaged up and dehydrated, whatever.
But I will make a point. I think that all is good, but I think it's simplistic and it's not helping. It's allowing more people to survive more and have more babies and so on. What we need, and I will have it on the next slide, but I want to just make 2 points here. But you had a question too?
Yeah, just a question with the overpopulation.
Yeah.
Now, we've had this massive aging population, and many other countries do too. Will we see a drop in people in certain areas because of that?
Yeah, well, it's already happening right now. Countries like Japan and Germany, for example, have negative population growth.
China.
And
Australia.
Even Australia, right? Australia without immigration, right?
Up until, I think it was 1961, they brought out the bill. Before that, people had humongous families. My grandmother was one of 22. You know, so
That's all your fault.
you have this humongous population, and when they die off, will we be left with a massively small population, and more go around? Or is it more the fact that women live longer?
But you know that right now, more than half of the people that are living on the planet haven't had babies yet. They're under 15.
Exactly. Well,
So there is a huge, I'm part of the baby boomers. At one time, the baby boomers were it, you know, there was a major population bubble. We're no longer because we are dying.
Which is good.
Right? And so it's a millennial.
I mean, I am one, but the reason I say that is that we are the wealthiest generation.
Yeah.
And we've got millennials coming through
That's
who
right.
only have casual work, etc. But they've got to pay our pensions.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, all of these social problems, right? Yeah, but the population increase is still, to my opinion, mathematically even, is locked in for another 50 years. Maybe in 100 years the global population will adjust, but it may reach 9 or 10 billion people, and I don't know what is happening. The prediction agriculturally is that we have to have by 2050. For some reason, 2050 is an important guidance here. That by 2050 we have to increase agricultural production by 75%. Now, population will not have increased by 75, but the people who are being born between now and 2050 will have the internet, and they will have iPhones, and they will have access to knowing how the better part of the globe lives. And so therefore they don't want to only eat cassava every day. They want to have a hamburger, you know, once a week or something. So therefore the dietary preferences are going to change. So 75% agricultural increase in production. Now, I work in biotechnology, and we always say, hoo-ha, you know, we can do everything, we can clone genes. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible to get 75% more out of a corn plant or a soybean plant and so on. And so there are going to be problems. They may, near in the future, and little things like we have now with the Ukrainian-Russian war and so on, are only accentuating it, and so therefore people think about it. But ultimately this is fermenting in the background. Yes?
What do you say about the notion that that producing plant protein is a lot more efficient, and so replacing significant amounts of animal protein with plant protein could make up a lot of that?
Yeah, and you're absolutely true. And plants like Pongamia even produce protein, and it has now been shown to be debitted, so it can be used. I've eaten Pongamia cookies and then things like that, made with Pongamia meal and so on. So yeah, moving towards eliminating the extra step of producing animals out of the plant protein. I mean, you know, it all runs on capturing solar energy. A cow cannot grow by itself, so therefore the cow needs to have the grass which has captured the solar energy, and therefore the cow can eat this and produce the meat which we eat as a steak. So the percentage energy yield which one has out of eating animal produce is really, really low. And that's exactly what I'm going to come to. But I want to, okay, yeah,
I
let's
know
go.
you've just started, so
Yeah, no, that's
you
good.
may well go into what
Yeah.
you may well mention, just to do with ecosystems,
Yeah,
wildlife, and other creatures that feed land. You may say something about that later.
no, I won't.
No?
No, so I won't have an ecological argument, but it is part. I mean, I'm a very integrated thinker, and although, you know, I earned my money out of being a molecular biologist, you know, and cloning DNA, but I can see the whole organism, but I can see the whole organism in an ecosystem, and you know, the different ecosystems that you're in at the same time. I mean, all of us here are in the ecosystem of Brisbane, the urban one, but even there are sub-ecosystems. You know, Turinga is probably different than, you know, some other place, and but yet we're in the ecosystem of Australia or Queensland. So I mean, the different.
The human ecosystem.
Yeah. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that there is this problem of population increase and population movement, because more and more people are finding out that a few thousand kilometers away, you know, you get a job, and even if it only pays $12 an hour, and so on, you know, it is a job. And this is why you have the large number of refugees moving everywhere in the world. I mean, whether in South America, whether in Asia, whether in Africa, and so on, whether in Europe, right? I mean, half the Ukraine, for example, right now is empty because the people have left, right? I mean, it's good so, because it's the families, the women and children who have left. And we have food security issues and fuel security issues. And just as an example, just so that we have numbers which are meaningful somehow, it's estimated that about 160 trillion liters of crude oil in reserves in the earth. So this is Saudi Arabia and, you know, all the hotspots. Now, there may be some extra hotspots deep in the ocean and so on, which have not been discovered, but they're going to be very, very difficult to mine. So there are no longer going to be any major oil discoveries in the world. You know, it's suddenly like the Alaska oil shelf or, you know, Northwest Cape. And that means that we're using 4 trillion liters per year of that. So therefore, mathematically, you can see that should be about 40 years. But the increase is increasing, and so and the last liters of reserves are going to be so expensive that there have to be alternatives. So I think the critical time will come up in about 20 years, right? As a matter of fact, yes, to give you a feeling of how much we're using, we use 120,000 liters of that oil, right? In every second that I spoke here right now.
Oh, really? Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah, wasted, right? Amazing, right? And okay, so there's some numbers which we can skip over. So therefore, what are the changes? What are the solutions? I mean, you know, will we invent a new technology which makes it all possible? Will we invent nuclear fusion, which will have no pollution and all safety aspects? I don't think so. I think the major change is social change, right? We have to change the way we live. We have to change the way that we put money as number one. Now, I'm not a communist or so, saying that we should do away with trying to urge, you know, to have money and so on. But ultimately, we cannot judge everything just simply on a financial basis. There have to be other values. And realistically, and the food habit change, you know, changing more towards eating plant protein rather than animal protein. But the essential thing about social change is not going to happen by itself. It's going to happen with education. It's going to happen with formal education, and it's going to happen with education like this. It's going to happen through media and so on. It happens through experiences and so on. I mean, so there are multiple forms of moving forward. And then part of that And number 3 as priority is technology and science. So hopefully technology and science will help in moving forward in that. So what does science give us? Science gives us an understanding of processes, just simply understanding how something happens, and gives us insights into outcomes. And so therefore, we now will speak about the science of biofuel, or bioenergy, which is renewable energy, as I told you, sustainably renewable energy. And so this means solar energy, which is captured by the plant and then converted to a usable, storable fuel. Right? A very, very simple definition of what is a biofuel. Now, there are many biofuels which we're familiar with, and some of them have existed for thousands of years. Right? Realistically, wood. Right? When you have a wooden fire, that's biofuel. Right? You're using a biological material, solar energy captured into wood, and you're burning it, and you can cook your meal or whatever it is. Very, very nice, it's romantic and so on, but it's ancient technology and it's very cumbersome and not energy very good. Coal is actually a biofuel. Right? I mean, it's a biological source originally, some trees and so on, and it's old as well, and it's cumbersome. There's some modern biofuels, like you can get ethanol, bioethanol made out of sugarcane, sugar and so on. It sounds very, very good. You can run your car, but ultimately the sugarcane is not the right plant to produce that ethanol, unfortunately, and we can discuss that later. Or you can have biodiesel as a biofuel, and it's excellent because it is has a high energy content. And the reason for it having a high energy content is because biodiesel is actually nothing else but a hydrocarbon. So it's hydrogen and carbon, it's a fatty acid, right? The normal kind of fatty acid which we use in our salads or so, like oleic acid, right? Now oleic acid has the acid end and the long hydrocarbon tail. Oleic acid also has a double bond, so it's kinked, and so therefore has some good dietary and physical properties. Now ethanol, in contrast, is 2 carbons, like this here. There's one hydroxyl group on it, looks like a little puppy, if I look at it. And it is very good too. You can burn ethanol very, very easily, and it makes energy, right? I mean, no problem. So how do we have our biofuel cycle? And I intentionally used the German slide just to show you how similar the languages are, right? So in the atmosphere, we have carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide gets absorbed by trees or plants, which use solar energy through a process called photosynthesis, and that produces oils or wood or whatever, and out of this you can produce a biodiesel, which you then can use in engines or some form or another, so you have emissions, and the emissions contain carbon dioxide again, and so they get reabsorbed, right? And ultimately this looks like a very, very happy cycle. Now there's some problems with it, because of efficiencies in it and things like that. But ultimately, it is that reutilization of the emissions which make biofuels so attractive. Now, how are biofuels made? And I told you biofuels are made out of oils, out of fat. You can use tallow, you can use plant oil, and all fats are this kind of molecule. This molecule is a triglyceride. You know, when you go to the doctor, they measure triglycerides in you. That's a way of measuring how much fat is in your blood system. And triglyceride has a glycerol backbone, and it has the fatty acids attached to it. Now, in humans, in animals, our major fatty acid is a fatty acid called stearic acid. And stearic acid has 18 carbons, so 18 carbons like this, and the hydrogens, and it is utilized as an energy source that's necessary by our metabolism, and it can be used as a biofuel. Right? Tallow can be used as an energy source, can be used and then burned. Now, plants make more fatty acids, more different types of fatty acids, and so therefore these side chains may be different. But in order to make your biofuel out of the triglyceride, out of the fat, you use a process which is called transesterification. So you're making an ester out of the fatty acid. So therefore, the fatty acid is a molecule like this, and you now add a methyl group, which comes from methanol as a source in the presence of alkaline catalysts, And what you end up is with a fatty acid methyl ester, which is abbreviated as FAME, right? It's, yeah, it's a nice word. And so this is biofuel. This is biodiesel, right? I mean, and so very common substances and very common things. Skip that. Now, if you make biofuels out of plants, you have two choices of plants. You have either plants which are non-legumes, you know, like corn, canola, sugarcane, jatropha, algae, and so on. And they all make fatty acids. They make triglycerides. And you can use those in order to convert the plant material into your biofuel food or whatever it is. I mean, that's just normal agriculture. So carbon dioxide gets used from the atmosphere in order to drive this process. You add nitrogen fertilizer and urea, manure, or whatever natural fertilizer or nitrate, and so on, it works. Now, the nitrogen fertilizer is negative in this equation, this overall scheme, because nitrogen fertilizer doesn't get used up all at once. It's the same that if I would take you and I calculate how many calories you need in a year, and I equate this, and that's probably 25 chickens and 40 loaves of bread and 2 kilograms of sugar and 400 bananas, right? And so here you are. That's your fertilizer, right? Well, your first few days you're going to eat like mad, right? Because you have all of the stuff. But eventually, stuff is going to spoil and it's going to rot and whatever. You cannot utilize all the proportion that is given to you. And that's the same as fertilization of plant. When the farmer goes along and adds the fertilizer, the 100 kilograms per hectare that is needed, or whatever, 200 for sugarcane. Sugarcane needs 200 kilograms of nitrogen fertilizer per year in order to produce that ethanol. So how ecologically sound is actually bioethanol, which we think lowers greenhouse emissions. I mean, it's all being given already by the nitrogen fertilizer. So therefore, I advise you to stay away from ethanol, bioethanol. So this is a bad equation. And what we need is a plant which is different than a non-legume, and so therefore it is a legume. And the legume has the advantage that it forms on its root system little structures which are called nodules, nitrogen fixing nodules. And they're called nitrogen fixing because they take nitrogen gas, N2 gas, from the atmosphere. 79% of the atmosphere is nitrogen gas. They take this and convert it to ammonia. And ammonia is a building block for amino acids and other metabolites which are needed for protein, DNA, RNA, and metabolites. So nitrogen is being used and used through symbiotic nitrogen fixation inside root nodules, and it goes into the legume plant in the root system together with the carbon dioxide which has been absorbed, and it produces a biomass. So you can see there's a lot of advantages of utilizing this process as compared to utilizing the non-legumes.
Sorry.
So, yeah?
Can I just ask a question? Does that mean you don't need nitrogen fertilizer?
That's right. And this is why farmers use medics and so on, I mean, the legume family has about 18,000 species, and I don't know them, but I know about 20 or 30, right? But medics, peas, bean, wattle trees, right? So they're trees and bushes, right? Pongamia, and so on. So soybean, right? French bean. I mean, they're all. If you pull a clover plant out, probably in your garden, you will see the little lumps on the root system. Now, most likely, because you don't only grow clover, you grow grass along with it, you probably have put some nitrogen fertilizer on it. The legume plant is smart and it shuts down nitrogen fixation if it gets nitrogen fertilizer for free, right? So therefore, the nodules on the inside will be whitish, yellowish. Whereas the nodules which I'm showing you here, you can see they're reddish inside, right? Now, this color red is fascinating because we know what causes it. It's caused by a protein which is called leg hemoglobin, legume hemoglobin. And if you look at the protein and the gene, it is the same hemoglobin that we have in our blood. Now, what does hemoglobin and myoglobin do in our muscles and our blood, right? It transports oxygen. And it does the same thing here. So therefore, in the plant kingdom, in legumes, you have an example of two genes which are the same in animals and in the plant kingdom, and they're actually fulfilling the same function, and that is oxygen transport, because the nitrogen fixation occurs inside here, and it needs ATP, chemical energy, in order to split the nitrogen atom, nitrogen molecule, because nitrogen that we breathe in and out inertly, we cannot use, has 3 bonds coupling it like this. And these bonds are very, very, very strong. So we breathe it in, we breathe it out. But the bacteria which make the nodules and which live inside the nodules, right? They have the capability of splitting each one of the bonds one by one, and then the empty bonds are satisfied with hydrogen, and that makes you ammonia, NH3, right? Okay, good.
Sorry, question.
Yeah, no.
Does that mean that legumes need no fertiliser?
No, they need phosphate and calcium and so on. But nitrogen is a major fertilizer requirement of a plant, right? I mean, for example, a plant always needs 10 times more nitrogen than it needs phosphate. I mean, depending on the soil, but in general. And it needs 100 times more, 100 times less sulfur than it needs nitrogen. So nitrogen is the major plant fertilizer.
Can we extract out this ammonia?
What?
Can we extract out the ammonia?
Yeah, we can extract the ammonia, but it's easier to let the plant take the ammonia and attach that molecule to another molecule called glutamate. And the glutamate then becomes glutamine. And glutamine is a building block for all the amino acids which we need, you know, the tryptophan and cysteine and arginine and so on. Right? And so, yes, we could extract the ammonia, but that would kill the plant. Right? Now, if you have an annual plant, the plant dies anyway, right? But if you have a perennial plant, you know, like a tree, like Pongamia, you could theoretically. But it's easier to let the plant handle the ammonia, assimilate it, right, and build it into molecules which you can isolate. And the best way of isolating something is to isolate the fruit, because you leave the plant growing and you isolate the fruit yearly, and you can get the molecules which you want. And so the molecules which are in the Pongamia seed are all protein and amino acids, therefore, and DNA and RNA and so on, right? Now,
Could I just quickly ask, where is Pongamia, can that be grown worldwide? Or does it
yes and no. Pongamia is native to Australia,
Oh, right.
so but it's native in as far as that it grows all the way from India to Australia. So it grows in Indonesia. It even has been seen on Mauritius, so therefore it travels on the ocean. I've been outside of Guangzhou in China, in southern China, and I've seen native Pongamia growing, not planted by people and so on. So it's, yes, the strip, ecological strip, right? Now, historically, the people of India have utilized Pongamia 2,000 years ago, right? Children collected the seed, and they brought it home to mom, and mom squashed them, and mom used the oil in order to drive the stove. Yes, to have the fuel for the stove, not to eat it, but just simply to have energy. So that's already 2,000 years ago. Now, you know, in northern Australia, I've been in Cooktown and so on, there are a lot of Pongamia around the area. I mean, it's wonderful to see how much it is spread, but it is native, you know, across that belt.
It's not regarded as a weed though, is it?
No, it is not. And there's a beautiful study by CSIRO, and the reason for it, and that's one of the reasons when I give you the seed, I will pass the seed around. I will pass several bottles around. I will pass several bits around. Okay, this is how the seeds look when they fall off the tree,
Oh, nice.
right? And they're in the capsule, they're like a bean, you know, or something. And the seed inside looks like this. And if you want some seeds, you can open this up and
I'll wait till everyone
Yeah.
sees it.
and you can take as many as you want to. I mean,
Thank you.
because I have a tree standing in front of my lab, and it's called UQ1 because it's on
Isn't that
UQ.
gorgeous? Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I planted it,
Yes.
and I planted it illegally.
Oh, wow.
Well, you're not allowed to plant trees on UQ officially, but they didn't notice, and now There's a little tag on it,
Oh.
and it's part of the UQ arboretum, so it's
That's cool.
officially, but it's called UQ1. It has a stem like this now, and it produces 20 to 30,000 seed like this
And
every year.
how long before it grows to maturity
It
to
depends.
produce seeds?
Yeah, it's again, we have to, and I'm sorry to be sexist here or something like that, it depends what you call maturity.
I mean,
Were you mature when you were 14 years old?
well,
you-
that's a personal question
Yeah.
because it's
No,
different
no,
for
no.
everybody.
No, that's exactly right. And so the tree will start flowering after 1 year.
Mhm.
And so if you mean flowering maturity,
Seeds.
well, that's what I mean, it makes seeds,
Okay.
right? But there will be only 20 seeds on the tree. And so therefore that's not useful for economics, right? So therefore you will wait, and you basically need 4 to 5 years in order to get the tree large enough to produce enough seed that you have a yield that gives you profit,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so.
And what would the yield be?
You're asking everything which I'm going to show you.
All right,
But
sorry.
no. But the yield will be, like I told you, about 20,000 seeds,
Thank you.
like that,
Yes.
per tree per year. And one seed weighs on average about 2 grams.
Uh-huh.
So that's 40 kilograms of seed, and 40% of the seed is oil. So therefore 40 kilograms, so you get 16 kilograms of oil per tree.
So if we all go out and buy a block of land as a collective,
Yeah.
as a cooperative,
Yeah,
and plant all our little,
yeah,
but then we can become potential, not just, you could be our
Are we
mentor.
allowed, is this illegal? You said it was illegal? Is this a good idea? to
This is a
plant-
hypothetical.
No.
This one's right, but is it legal to have it there at Egypt?
yes, absolutely legal.
Is it a potential weed?
No, I told you,
Like lantana or
I told you, no, it is not, because CSIO made a risk assessment. And
That's
the
right.
only thing that the CSIO risk assessment, I give you the reference, it's quite a large document. The risk assessment shows that you should not intentionally plant it within 50 meters of a waterway.
Okay.
And the argument being that the seed pods will fall otherwise into the water and get transported to an unknown environment, ecosystem. And so therefore, keep it away.
So how did they evaluate that? Did they do it well?
Well, I'm going to come back to that
Sorry.
because of the seeds which I'm handing around. These seeds don't germinate easily, right? So my Pongamia tree, UQ1, has, let's say, 20, 30,000 seeds. And they fall onto the pavement and everything,
I
which
think I've seen things.
Yeah, you've
like
seen
that
it, right?
before. I've seen very similar seeds
Yeah.
to the second
But
photo.
the area underneath the tree is not filled with baby trees, right? I mean, it's only 1 in 1,000 will germinate or something.
Certainly the large seeds would not be consumable by birds.
Right.
So I
And-
guess the smaller animals.
Right, and also the small animals don't eat them because it tastes bad. And I challenge you, it's fun. I mean, I'm not trying to kill you. Take one of the seeds and bite into it. No. For the first 10, 20 seconds, it tastes like a bean. Really beany flavor. But then afterwards, it tastes like dentist. Very, very bitter. So it's not pleasant. I mean, and possums and so on don't eat it. And, I mean, but the bottom line is to germinate those seeds. Maybe I will explain that now, and then we go back to more of the science. To germinate the seed, take them and put them onto a flat saucer, and fill the saucer with just water, normal water, bit warmish water. I mean, don't shock them, right? But don't drown the seed. So then make sure that half of the seed is still in the air. And take this and put it on top of your hot water system or something. Right? Now you have to replenish the water because it will evaporate, right? So make sure that you add new water to it every day or so, right? Doesn't matter if it's a bit more, but make sure that it is warmer than 17 degrees, 17. The reason for that is that Pongamia goes to sleep below 17 degrees. And now not the root system, the roots will grow and so on, and the leaves will stay on, like that little bit of a plantlet which I have reached around. Still looks very, very fit, but they don't grow. The growing point does not keep growing. It will start growing again once the night temperatures come up, And so in the Brisbane area, it means it will start growing rapidly by late October. Now, a tree, an established tree after the first year will grow a meter a year. It will grow rapidly. I mean, it's beautiful to see the rapid growth potential. But that's, and that what limits the tree to warmer environments. So Brisbane is just at the southern edge of its environment. I have some friends in Inverell, in northern New South Wales, and it's not proper for them. The tree will grow, but it will not, the seed will not manage to mature enough so that they can get harvested in November. Right? So the plant flowers in November, December, and it takes 11, 12 months for the seed to be harvested. So right now, if you find a Pongamia tree, you will see green pods on it. At first you won't see the pods because the leaves are green, right? And so the green leaves and green pods, but the trees are full, so much so that branches actually start hanging down already. But it's all a dormant period right now.
How high are the trees?
Oh, well, again, I can give you whatever answer you want to have. At what stage, at what age? When they germinate, they're this high. After 3 weeks, 4 weeks of growth, they're about this high, right? After 1 year, they're about a meter high. And after 10 years, they're 6, 7 meters high. So it's not an indoor plant. But it's nice to have on your porch as well, right? And I have some in pots at home. Actually, I run experiments with the plants because there's something which makes it a bit complicated. I make it sound as if everything is good, but there's some sneaky tricks which you have to fulfill. The major one is that Pongamia is the same like us humans. It's outcrossing, right? It doesn't have sex with itself, right? So it gets fertilized by somebody else, and it does so by bees. Bees come, native bees or European honeybees and so on. Works beautifully, you don't have to worry. Except if you have a plantation, you have to have some beehives there in order to fertilize all the hundreds of trees, because you plant 500 to 600 trees per hectare. Right? Okay, so that's a quite dense flower population. Yeah.
Just a question. You know how you said it grows on multiple continents and basins?
Yes.
Was it endemic to Gondwana land, very similar to many other trees?
Probably.
Like what was it called? The Antarctic beech tree.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah.
Grew across continents.
Probably.
It's across.
I haven't thought about it and I haven't read about it, so yeah. But it's possible, yeah.
Yeah, Antarctic beech was like that. You
Yeah.
find it in all over the place because of
Yeah.
the
Pongamia actually is called commonly also Indian beech.
Ah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So Pongam, yeah.
interesting.
But it's a legume, and beech normally is not a legume.
Ah.
Beech trees are
No,
not legumes.
they're good for the soil, but they're good for
Yeah,
different
yeah.
things.
But they're not part of the legume family. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so Pongamia will grow relatively easy here in Brisbane, and it will grow well in your garden, and it will make seeds easily. As I said, it flowers beautifully, and that's why Brisbane City Council planted so many trees. If you go to Fortitude Valley, there's a street which goes off James Street, and it's called Robertson Street. Right? I mean, it's a very, very obvious street. That street is just full of Pongamia. Just planted by the city in order to be beautiful. I've spoken to people in Gresshoff who have beautiful Pongamia trees growing outside their place, and they love them, except for all the seed pods which fall down, because the lawnmower spits them out, you know, when they run over, and they make a bit of junk. But they're beautiful ornamental trees. I live in Taringa, as I told you, and Perrin Park is close. You know, the very low park gets flooded regularly. It has several Pongamia trees, but they're all planted. I mean, they're all. And we have done DNA analysis of the trees that grow in Brisbane. Not all of the trees, because 20,000 of them. And the relationship of the Brisbane planted trees is very, very close to the Indian trees. So I believe that 20, 30 years ago, Brisbane City Council or some nursery that they hired got seeds in from India, or seedlings, and planted them. But they're Australian natives, and some of them are growing in Brisbane. And I can tell you that if you go to Park Road, you know, going off Coronation Drive, You know, you have all the restaurants there, the Eiffel Tower, right? I mean, and you know, familiar? No, Park Road off Coronation Drive in Milton, right? But anyway, you go on Park Road, and at the one corner there is a Thai restaurant called TikTok, and the next corner on that side is another little street which I don't know what it's called, but it has 2 Pongamia trees growing, and DNA analysis shows that they're Australian native.
Oh.
So we have Australian native growing in Brisbane. The leaf shape is slightly different, and the seeds are slightly smaller. So the Indian ecotypes, you know, probably are the better ones. Yeah, and probably because they have been selected for longer. You know, and it was probably women in India who felt that this tree was good. So therefore they collected some of the seeds and planted them, you know, for their family to have in the future. Right? Okay. So I told you how to germinate the seed. If you
Are
have
they
good,
hardy?
huh?
Would someone who's not a good gardener kill it?
No, well, it depends.
Does it need a lot of water?
No, I'm coming to this girl.
Oh.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Anyway, how are we doing for time? I'm exhausting you? Or? Okay.
I understand you have to finish by 4.
I have to leave unfortunately by 4 o'clock because I have to pick up my son from the airport.
Only 3.
But yeah, perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So I will show you some pictures and then we will go into some science and so on. This is how a Pongamia tree looks on the street. This is in Gresshoff and so on. And it's wonderful because in spring the tree loses its leaves. Right? So they have leaves now while they're dormant, but once spring comes, they lose the leaves and they sprout all new leaves. And therefore it's very easy to recognize a Pongamia tree because it has these lime green leaves. I mean, absolutely sparkling, because the Australian foliage of Australian natives is usually a bit darker and so on. The flowers look like this, and they're in clusters, so there is one small flowering stem, and it has about 50 flowers like this. And the flowers are about the size of my small fingernail, right? And the flowers get sequentially fertile. So they're fertile over about a 3-week period. And bee fertilization is important. The seed, you see the real thing, what I handed around. They weigh about 2 grams. Some elite trees, some mother trees are 3-gram trees, and so therefore very, very worthwhile. And on the root system, this looks like a soybean root system, and you can see all of these little lumps on there. These are the nitrogen fixing nodules, which when you cut them open, as I told you, and so on, and this is about 4 millimeter in diameter, shows this nitrogen fixing tissue characterized by late hemoglobin. You can also plant them in the field, and so here this is how a seedling looks, right? I should tell you that when you plant the seedling, I mean, it's best to plant something that has germinated on the plate for you, so once you see the root. Don't bury it too deep. You see this one here, you can see the soil, and the seed, the cotyledons, the seed leaves, are still, you know, just at the surface, right? So don't put it 2 or 3 centimeters deep. We ran a project, and the pictures are from that project here. Origin Energy, out at Spring Gully, out close to Roma, has a gas, a coal seam gas plant. And so therefore they're interested in what is underneath the ground, not what is on top of the ground. And so this Origin Energy and George Muirhead, we planted Pongamia, 300 hectares. And although it's cold there, in the hollows out at Spring Gully, it gets -7, -8 degrees. The Polygamia doesn't like it. But on the shallow areas, you know, the flat areas, they grow beautifully. So you plant the plant in spring like this, or this like this, and you can see my notebook lying there. And there's my notebook for scale again. Mm-hmm. And you can see how much it has grown as a fall. So this is, you know, inside of 5-6 months. I've shown you the seeds, and I've shown you how they look hanging on the tree. Very, very familiar. As I told you, they are grown amply in Brisbane street trees, and they're usually about this size. And like I told you, about 20 or so thousand. But they were planted for beautification and resilience. And resilience because they don't need watering. Once they're like this, they just simply are highly drought tolerant. We've had plants which had not received water for 4 months, and they still had their leaves. I mean, no, but they're very, very deep rooted, you see, so they're probably exploring groundwater. Now I want to give you 2 bits of advertising. There's a Google thing on me. I'm on it. I'm a bit younger, without a beard, and so on. And it's that I spoke at the Avalon airfield in Victoria, outside of Melbourne. And I gave a lecture on biofuel, and I was interviewed. And I think it's very, very worthwhile to look at. So just simply put those names in your call line, and you will get me. There's also some very, very, very interesting student projects. I had a student, her name was Sandra, and she did Pongamia research, and she was wonderful. I mean, laboratory work, you know, isolating the DNA and protein and sequencing and so on. And she came to me and said, Peter, I love your lab, I love working with you, I love working with Pongamia, but I don't see myself as a laboratory scientist. That's not my direction, I want to quit. And I was really hurt by that, because a career, you know, she had to throw away 1.5, 2 years or so of work. And I said, why don't you take a few weeks, maybe a month off? You can take it, the university will give you this. Think a little bit more about it, and so on. But maybe there's some alternatives. So she came back and she said she wants to communicate about Pongamia. And so I went to the arts faculty, and I found a supervisor who was interested in the idea of communicating to the general public about Pongamia. And so she started to run Pongamia study projects, and so 10 students would, you know, do something, and they would compose a song and make a show out of it. I mean, just things like that, very, very, very playful, very, very, very creative, right? And that is here, the WW projects. Yeah, she did very well. And she got a fantastic job with the state government, by the way. So and hopefully she's doing well. Okay, now here are some of the properties which you were asking about, and probably most of you are interested in. Okay, now Pongamia is a tropical, subtropical legume, right, from India to Cairns, basically, right? It's a nitrogen-fixing legume, and so therefore it has a lower carbon footprint, right? It doesn't need as much carbon in order to make it grow as compared to wheat or whatever fuel crop. It has a high annual, and it's important to read the word annual, a high annual seed yield, about 10 to 20,000 seeds per tree. If you have an elite tree, 30 or even more. Now let me tell you about elite trees, and we started to talk about it a few minutes ago. Pongamia is like us humans, so it's outcrossing. So you don't know who is the father of the seed that you just picked out of the jar, right? And so therefore the father could have been a real dad in terms of producing seed. They had the wrong genetic material. It's just like all of us. I mean, we all come from the same mom and dad, but our sisters and brothers are not necessarily like us. So out at Gatton, we had 360 trees growing, and about 10% of those trees were elite. They were really well. They grew well. They produced a lot of seed. The other ones were good, and then some of them were really lousy. It's just simply genetic diversity within the population of your offspring, right? Now, what we have done is we have taken the elite trees, so the tree which has the right genetic, capability to produce 20,000, 30,000 seeds, right? And we cloned them. And there are different methods of cloning, and I will show you one of them. But the one which is most cost effective, once you have to produce 1 million trees or so, right, is actually rooted cutting. So you take a cutting of a tree, a little bit like this, with an internode in it and a node, right? And you simply put rooting powder on the cut surface, and you keep it in a semi-dark, moist place, and it will sprout roots, and it will sprout a tree. And those are clones; they're genetically identical. And we have tested these clones for uniformity in the field, and they're beautifully uniform, so they can be harvested at the same time. Except again, clones bring up a genetic problem. If you plant something which is all clones, you run the risk that one day some magic fungus or virus or so comes along who loves that clone and wipes it all out. And a good example of that is the 1970 US corn crop. Maybe you haven't heard about this. but the 70% of the US corn crop got wiped out in one go, right? And it was because all of the corn varieties being planted had one parent common, and so therefore the susceptibility came from there. So the answer with the clones is that we're planting a patchwork of clones, right? So you plant 1 hectare of clone A, 1 of B, 1 of C, so therefore you have safety. You have a question?
It's like Dutch elm disease, wiped out all the elms.
Yeah, yeah.
But then the Australian ones were
Yeah.
Brazilian.
Yeah. And indeed, it's something we don't know much about. I mean, this is the early stages of the industry, and when I speak to people in industry, I don't know everything. We don't know everything in mankind. You know, humanity doesn't know everything, right? We know very, very little about the pathogenicity, the diseases and so on of Pongamia, right? We know that up north, some caterpillars bore into the seed. So in the north, maybe you have to spray. Whereas if you're more south here, you know, Atherton tableland and southwards and so on, maybe you're okay without spraying. Right? So, yeah.
You said that you tried to grow it in, was it Emperor? How far south can we go to grow this stuff?
Say it again?
You said, didn't you say you tried to grow some in, was it Emperor or leguminous or somewhere?
Yeah, yeah. It's too cold.
And it's too cold.
Yeah.
So how far south can we go in growing this stuff?
Gatton, Brisbane area.
That's what
Yeah, southern Queensland.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
I planted some, I have a house on the Sunshine Coast, and I planted a Pongamia tree, and it's Headland Court, in case you want to look, yeah. 19 Headland
We'll
Court.
all drive by and check our horns.
Yeah, yeah.
I like Florida and that's true.
I'm like Johnny Appleseed. Have you noticed? I'm sort of
Yeah.
sneaking seeds to you, and
Well, you've got to
maybe
practice
maybe
what you do.
10% of you will plant it, and 5% of them will reproduce. And so, and you know, way after I'm dead, they will say, "Oh, that came from Peter Gresshoff." Anyway, onward. You have a question? Okay. So the neat facts on here. I summarize it. It has 50% oil content. No, it has 40% oil content. Sorry, about 35 to 43%, of which 50 or so percent is oleic acid, right? Which is a very, very good oil for energy. It has major cropping possible after 4 to 6 years, depending where you are and what you expect. It has high energy byproducts. So the pod walls, for example, can be burnt, and that produces energy, right? And there's starch and protein. It survives temperatures as low as -6 degrees. And that's based on experience out at Spring Valley. But again, commercially, when I speak to companies, I tell them, don't risk it by growing something in an area where it might be maybe -6 degrees. You want to make sure that you don't get close to that, so have it a bit warmer. Now, what is interesting is there's drought tolerance after the sapling stage. So when the plant is small, it needs water. You have to water it, but once it has a deep root system, 1 or 2 years, it has extreme drought tolerance. And most importantly, which I think is giving a lot of land, because farmers simply have salinity problems, it is salinity tolerant. And the level of salinity tolerance is 20 decisiemens per meter. Now, that doesn't mean much to you, but it's the electrical conductivity, because if there's salt, electricity can get conducted in the soil. But just to tell you that soybean, for example, if you have 4 or 5 decisiemens per meter, it dies. So it is 4 or 5 times the salinity level tolerated that soybean has, for example. Yeah.
Just a question, with this plant, now I understand that the outways particularly they have problems with salinity, and the reason for that is they're taking all the trees out of the
That's right.
deforestation.
Yeah.
But if you were to grow like a whole crop of this, would the roots push the salt back down into the ground?
That's right.
Like,
Yeah,
you said they
because, well,
rooted.
it doesn't push the salt, it pushes the water down.
It does.
Right, and so
Water.
therefore the salt follows the water.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that would actually help with
Yeah.
salinity.
That's that's why I think its application for reforestation and then things like that is immense. And even the Queensland government right now has a major policy against deforestation, right? But it is arguing now, it is just at that level, that if you plant a new plant there, so therefore you don't need naked soil, but you have, and you don't clear ancient forests, original rainforests, but you clear regrowth. Right? For example, George Muirhead owns 750,000 hectares up at Weeper, right? And he wants to grow Pongamia there. But most of those are regrowth. It used to be cattle country, but the trees have grown, so they're 20-year-old trees on it. Queensland government regulation does not permit clearing of that forest. So, but he's negotiating, and an ear is being given if there is a biofuel crop or a reforestation to some other crop, then maybe it's permitted. So this is all in flux right now, which is good. Yes.
I don't think you're going to tell us this one, but if I start and you are,
Yes.
just say
Go ahead.
wait.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we have massive tracts of wetlands
Yeah.
and other protected parts of across Australia, but the one I'm talking about at the moment is down at Qld,
Yeah.
and there's a petition that's only got 300 signatures. They're going to put a whole proposed corridor, highway, motorway through it, and that some of the species of wildlife obviously can't.
Yeah.
So when that happens, and I know we talked about clearing, agricultural clearing, how does that affect, obviously we know it affects the ecosystem, but how does that affect the capacity for the government to say, you cannot clear any land, but we can?
Yeah, well, it's a political question that you have.
Exactly.
Yeah, and yeah.
You just have to lobby.
It's a problem. I mean, my own philosophy is that we cannot keep everything the way it is. So, but it would be nice if we could keep 80% the way it is, right? And so therefore, some things have to change, and some areas need to be cleared.
Well, it comes back, I guess, to your first PowerPoint where it's second point was education.
Yeah.
If I could just quickly ask, flooding, major flooding, with the Brisbane River, how does it go?
Yes, and again we have experience because Anna Bly, just before she went out, gave us $1 million, right? And that was very, very special for the Queensland government to do that. And it involved a program where we had about 10 farmers in the southeast here, most of them in the Sunshine Coast hinterland, and to grow Pongamia, just simply to see how it goes. And a lot of the plantings were close to the Nambour River, and as a matter of fact, that big bridge which goes over just behind Buluba, Maroochydore, over the Nambour River, I think it's called that way. And I've seen Pongamia trees which are this tall because they're planted for a week underwater, and they're okay. They get a bit muddy and so on, but they grow, so they have that drought tolerance.
So they're a gift from nature.
Very much, and we have to exploit it, I think. And this is what the irony is, that the major commercial interests, like I told you, Mitsubishi wants to grow 50,000 hectares. 50,000 hectares.
But they don't have the land.
And that's why I was up at Port Douglas and at Cairns in the last 2 weeks, in order to speak to farmers and councillors, in order to see if people are willing to lease the land, right? So if a farmer has some area of land which is not optimal anymore for the original agricultural purposes, if that land can be leased for 20 years, and with the right kind of contract, so you're part of the profit and whatever, so you can actually have a network of Pongamia plantations, as long as they're not too far apart. If they're 200 kilometers apart, then servicing and harvesting and so on becomes difficult. But if you're 100 kilometers, our belief is 100 kilometers is doable, you can easily get something like 30,000 hectares of land. Now, Enola, the largest petrol company in Japan, right? So they're probably selling it under a different name. They were actually here. They want to grow 150,000 hectares in Queensland. The Europeans are contacting me because they want to have information where in Australia can they grow the right kind of genetic material which they then can plant as reforestation in Australia, in Europe. So it's all outside interest right now. So Australian industry hasn't really picked up.
So we need to as a cooperative, don't we? I'm just talking silly.
Yeah, but that cooperative, that's how we got to talk about it, shouldn't plant the seed that I showed you there. Because we don't know.
Can we let someone else ask the question?
I beg your pardon.
Yeah, but it's the cooperative would suffer from the genetic heterogeneity. So we would have to clone or use some of the clones that I have in order to plant. If you had a question.
A couple of things.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first then?
And you second.
Well, we have in the past seen the danger of monocultures.
Yes.
Which is what's been touted here.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be a lot of caution.
Yeah.
That's one thing. And the other thing is going back to what used to be called triple bottom line accountability,
Yeah.
where you didn't just take one aspect
Yeah.
into account.
Yeah.
And the other thing is interdisciplinarity, whereas quite the more progressive way of research now is to work with others in various disciplines together.
Yeah.
So that you get more of a whole picture.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Good.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Good. So
Yeah.
that's three things that
Yeah.
I think are worth considering
Yeah.
for those that are thinking about planting.
And there have been ideas of intercropping Pongamia, right? So they're actually having a normal agricultural field, but having actually Pongamia rows in between. So you're harvesting your normal agricultural crop. And I have seen.
But we also need biodiversity to survive.
Yeah.
So if we're going to just think about humans, which we are thinking about only, then we also need biodiverse species to live on Earth.
Yeah.
So that is a very large consideration which we are losing by the minute, which needs to be considered.
But it is being lost because we're 8 billion people.
Yeah.
And if we were 1 billion people on the planet, it would be paradise.
Well, there's a few factors, not just population, but population is a major thing, but there are other factors as well.
Yeah. So I agree with multidisciplinarity, and I believe
Interdisciplinarity.
Yeah.
Multi's keeping separate still.
Yeah. Yes.
So I just want to, when you were just talking about, can we clear land for it? I'm sort of thinking there's a phenomenal amount of cleared land already in Queensland and in Australia. A lot of it cleared for animal agriculture.
Yeah.
And I think you might have touched on it. Is there a way to utilise some of that or share that or that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Is it just on that? I guess there are some very, very low intensity animal agriculture places that are not suitable for much.
Yeah.
Are those places where that would grow?
We have experience in animal and Pongamia growing together.
Yeah.
So cattle will graze in between Pongamia trees, and they love the shade and everything. They don't rub on them, they don't eat them.
Mm-hmm.
We have grown sheep in between the Pongamia in order to keep the grass down. As simple as that. Merino sheep are bad, they will eat the bark, they will nibble on the trees and kill the trees. But there is this type of sheep which has a different fleece, dopper or something like that. Dopper? Yeah, and they're perfect. They are simply graze in between, they don't attack the tree, and so George Muirhead has used them out at Limba, close to Caboolture, and it works perfectly.
Dopper meat sheep, are they?
Yeah, dopper sheep.
If they're meat,
Yeah.
That's the difference between merino and
That's right. Yeah, and they look very beefy.
So just a question, talking about the acreage that Mitsubishi's interested in planting. Is that actually are they looking to carry out forward the production of biofuel, or are they just using it as a carbon offset?
No, well, probably both. I mean, I'm sure they've calculated it in, but they want to have the oil, right? And the oil will be exported to Japan. And the reason for that is because the Japanese government, I mean, this is where legislation and politics come together and so on. The Japanese government about 12 months ago passed legislation that it will pay over a period of 20 years a company 24 cents per kilowatt hour if the electricity is produced by sustainable means. And so Mitsubishi is calculating 24 cents per kilowatt hour. How many kilowatt hours do you get out of a ton of Pongamia oil, right? And it's sustainable. So there are huge financial calculations in the background, not only ecological ones, right? But that's why Japan is so interested. We finished a project with a Japanese company called Glutamine. You can Google it. The company's name. It's a name of an algae, but it's a food company, a sustainable food company. And they want 1,000 tons of Pongamia oil per year. And so, you know, where to grow them and when to have them, but they want to have it, you know, forever, right? Maybe more if they increase their business. Yeah.
So you mentioned that they can grow on poor quality soil.
Yes.
So do they improve the quality soil?
That's right. And all legumes do. That's why farmers put legumes in rotation and so on, right? I mean, you grow corn in the US, you grow corn in rotation with soybean, and the soybean will change the carbon content of the soil, and so therefore the quality of the soil, right? And if you have the right kind of nitrogen fixing symbiosis going on in the nodules, you will actually even increase, because you have carryover of nitrogen. So therefore the corn crop, which is planted after the legume crop, needs less nitrogen in order to grow because of the leftover, you know, root material and nitrogen left behind. So, and you know, farmers have done this forever. I mean, they've grown lupins, right? And even plow the lupin into the field. And you know, you have mixed pastures. You have subterranean clover together with ryegrass or so in order to feed your cattle, right? So legumes are part of agriculture. It's only that because of the advent of industrial fertilizer, which 50 years ago was cheap, right? But now it is very, very expensive, and it runs off into surface waters. And so you have eutrophication, and you know, and then all the problems, the environmental problems which come, yes, simply from fertilizer use, because as I was saying an hour ago, so the plant cannot absorb all the fertilizer that is being put onto the field at time zero, so. Right? Okay,
What
back
kind
there.
of cost are we talking here? You're saying 24 cents
Per kilowatt hour.
reduction, and I mean, I would have thought this is more competitive with petrol or diesel. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's a fair bit more expensive than coal, so to be competing with coal would be remarkable.
But the Japanese government wants to have a sustainable energy source.
Yeah, but do you have vague cost estimates per,
I have.
I don't know, compared to...
There is a federal government agency which is called RIRDC, RIRDC, which stands for Rural Industry Research and Development Corporation. And they do exactly what the name says. And I received 2 grants from them, together with Peter Wiley, of $60,000 each. And each one of the grants was to write a technical and economic analysis of exactly what you were talking about. Now, if you write to me, I send you the copy. There's a preliminary report from the first $60,000, and now we've completed the final report. It's about 160 pages, and it tells you exactly the economic risks and the values and so on.
That sounds great, but do you have a headline summary sort of figure that you could share with us now?
No, because there's so many different circumstances, you know, where it would hold true. And so, but it is cost competitive, I mean, as simple as that.
And that's even
I mean,
now
it's
cost competitive.
Right?
Even now cost
Yes,
competitive.
of
And
course.
I mean, if
You don't need further genetic
costs
improvement.
always tend to go down when you're
Well, it depends on what scale you plant it. So if we follow her idea of that, we come together and we plant 5 hectares of Pongamia, we won't make money out of it. It's just simply too small, right? Because you will need to have the crushing facility, you will have to have a nursery facility, right? You have the detoxification if you want to use some of it for human consumption or animal consumption. So companies like Mitsubishi are not only looking at planting 25 million trees, they're actually looking at what nurseries are needed, what skill, what labor force, you know, where do you get the water from, right? And so on. And we have negotiation with indigenous people. For example, up in the northern Atherton tableland, there's a mountain, a very, very long mountain called Mount Mulligan. don't know if you know it. It's really, really beautiful. It has, bush country and so on, and it has holy, sanctuaries on it and so on. But the area around Mount Mulligan is owned by this one Aboriginal family clan group, and it's 175,000 hectares. And they want to do something with the land. I mean, it's all very nice having it and so on, right? And some spots you want to keep for cultural reasons and so on, but ultimately the rest of the land they want to use. And so Pongamia fits right down their line, because that means labor, workforce. So people who hang around right now, yes, outside of Cairns, south of Cairns, that's where the family, the tribe lives, and so on. They would actually have an agricultural enterprise, right, together with Uglina in Japan, in order to produce that 1,100 tons of oil per year, right? And that's wonderful, I think. But that then raises sociological questions. Where are the children of those people going to be educated? Are they still back south of Cairns, and only the workers move to the side? Or do you start a new village out at Mount Mulligan, which has its own school and so on? I mean, is there enough population increase? I mean, water, the area gets a lot of water, but only for 2 months. The rest of the time it's very hot. So therefore you need dams, you need to store the water, right? What are the restrictions on doing that? And how many megaliters per hectare do you need in Pongamia, especially when you establish it, right? And so on. I mean, there are many questions, and so therefore companies can have two different kind of attitudes. One of them is to be very conservative and make sure that they only put money into something where they think and can make sure that everything will work. Or alternatively, some of them are willing to take a small risk. And that's why I think, I think very highly of Mitsubishi, right, in doing this. I mean, you're yawning, so therefore I should.
No, I've got jet lag.
Slow.
That's not you.
Yeah.
So just a question.
Yeah.
Regarding so when you use superphosphate, one of the major ingredients is nitrogen. And whenever we use this stuff, it washes off and it goes into water, like
That's
you said,
right.
and it creates single-celled organisms. One of the major ones, blue-green algae.
That's right. It's
Really
called
nasty.
eutrophication.
Yes, it's really nasty here in
Yeah.
Australia. So
Yeah.
potentially, if you're using these trees,
Yeah, legumes don't do it because the nitrogen stays inside the plant.
so and it also stays in the soil. So would you have a selling point of being able to reduce blue-green algae potentially?
Yes,
with these
well,
trees?
because you have less industrial fertilizer usage, and industrial fertilizer usage is by definition soluble. I mean, yeah, and so,
Exactly, that's the
so therefore it rains and it runs off. Right? Yeah,
Washes into waterways.
yeah, yeah. It all fits together. But I want to keep on going a little bit. What is the time actually? So that
25 to
okay, I go quickly because I want to show off a little bit. Yeah, have I shown you everything? Oh, Pongamia oil. Yeah. It has a little bit of wax in it because I transported it. It got a bit cloudy. Open it up and smell it. It has a nice smell, and it's wonderful on furniture. I tell you, all of my wooden surfaces in my house are being treated with Pongamia oil. Okay, onwards, simply. Okay, there are a lot of publications we published, and as I show you, they're mine. So therefore, anyway, so we skip this. Pongamia is best grown in this area of Australia. Now, where the stars are, we have tested growth, right? The major agricultural area is like this, so it's a nice overlap, I mean, it works well. Australia has a lot of area where Pongamia can be grown. This is our plantation out at Gatton. And we grew it for 13 years. It no longer is active right now. And in springtime, you can see all the trees have lost their leaves. And it looks as if they're messy up there. But when you look in detail, it's all seed. Right, do you see that? So one seed next to the other. So that is very worthwhile. We grew plants out at Hopewell, which is north of Cooktown. So the Aboriginal people there, that's the work crew here, planted and planted. What happened is that because of 5 hectares were planted, it was beautiful, but a grass fire, a weed fire came up, and it killed, I mean, it burnt the whole plantation. But the Pongamia regrew, and as the new spuds came out and so on, then the locusts came, the grasshoppers came, and ate all the new growth, but they're still growing, right? So it's something worthwhile.
Should co-grow them with chickens?
Yeah.
Make it eat the caterpillars and the
Yeah,
grasshoppers?
it should be, theoretically. You harvest Pongamia by shaking the tree, and it's sort of best to have a small little unit like this where you have a big umbrella which goes and folds around the trees. This is a street tree here in Brisbane, and it shakes it and it gets collected by this umbrella. So you get about 95% of the tree seed, and you get a few leaves and so on. This is another version of it. It's the same as macadamia nuts and cashew nuts and so on, right? In agriculture. This is at Spring Gully, I told you. We first started with 2.1 hectares of plantation, coal seam gas area. And we planted this area here. And it's land like this, right? I mean, and very, very quickly, you know, the trees, after 3 years, you know, have grown like that. Then we started to plant 300 hectares of plants, and so that meant really mechanization. So this is really commercial agriculture, and you can see the planting being made ready. This is how it looks now. So therefore, this year, right, is this year now. Fantastic, huh?
Pretty.
Right? And you can see cattle is growing in between. They simply walk around. It's good growth. We were there in order to write that agri-futures Derek Riddick report. We were there and harvested some trees. They had 10 kilograms, 15 kilograms per tree of seed. We also got a project, an ARC linkage grant, where you work together with industry in order to look at stabilization, rehabilitation, and nutrient flux. And we did this at the Stanwell mine, the Meandu mine, which produces all the coal for the electricity plant out at Kilcoy, right? And this is how the coal mine looks. I mean, it looks like a lunar landscape, and it looks horrible. And so the question is, how do you stabilize? How do you utilize land like this? And you know, I mean, it's shocking. So there's a power plant. So we planted Pongamia, you can see, and we planted them carefully because it's on the slope, so that you don't have water runoff. And within a year or so, 2 years, you have this. And what is amazing is that the control was eucalypt being grown and even wattle being grown. The Pongamia stimulates the grass growth. So therefore, it simply captures more of the surface. So a wonderful, wonderful example, and Stanwell is very, very happy with that outcome. But if you want to see a tree here, we have a local tree. It's called UQ1, and it grows in front of my laboratory on Mansfield Place at UQ. And so it's a lot bigger right now. If you see the tree, you can steal seed or whatever. It doesn't matter. But there are hundreds of them, as I told you, around. And when you look at the seed, and you do analysis of the seed, so therefore this is the amount of what is there, and this is the retention time that the sample is going through the machine, you can separate all the different oils and fatty acids in the seed. And you can see that the major peak, the abundance, is C18.1, that's oleic acid. C18.0, which is stearic acid, right, is here. So therefore the fat that is in us, the fatty acid, is very, very low. This peak here is C17.0, which is a synthetic fatty acid used as an internal reference. And so therefore that is only there. But you can see that the higher, the more saturated, unsaturated fatty acids, and the palmitic acid, which is C16, is at very, very low levels. So it's very, very good oil. When you look at different trees, so tree 1, tree 4, tree 8, for example, and you look at all the different fatty acids in it, you can see that they're more or less the same, right? So great uniformity. So the embryo is genetically heterogeneous, right? They're different from the neighboring sisters and brothers. But the mother is controlling how much quality oil is being produced. And this goes for many, many other components I'm not going to speak about. But because there's genetic variability, I told you that we've done clonal propagation. The simplest one is by cutting and rooted cutting, but you can also do tissue culture. It's more expensive and it sounds more fancy, and it can be maybe used for other applications, but you can take a piece of tissue and you treat it with hormones, and little sprouts come out of the tissue. And you can isolate the sprouts like you can see here, and you can plant it as a pot here, quite a large pot, and these plants are grown in the field. The advantage of clones is also academic, because you can plant the same genetic material in different places. So we planted them in Gatton, and at Walkerman, and at South Johnson. And the two latter places are up in northern Queensland. So we're looking at the wet tropic and the dry tropic, and at Lockyer Valley. So you can compare the performance of the plant. I told you we can do DNA analysis, and I'm not going to go into detail, but you can easily separate one from the other. So you can hunt for genes very easily. We know about the protein content, it's around 20% on average. And when you run a gel of proteins, and here we are comparing soybean on the left and Pongamia on the right, you can see that Pongamia protein is not as good as soybean protein. Soybean has many more proteins in its seed, and so therefore it's nutritionally better. But it's still protein, and it's still useful for diets of animals. What we have done is, because we are molecular geneticists and so on, we've looked at the DNA of the plant. And you know all plants capture solar sunlight, and so therefore they use that energy through photosynthesis in order to make sugar. And that's the sugar then allows the growth of the plant. And so this is the DNA of the Pongamia in a chloroplast, the little green blobs which are round, and diagrammatically they look like this. And you can see each one of the colored boxes is a gene. And so there are about 70, 80 genes on the chloroplast DNA. But if you're comparing it to other legumes, it's very much the same. So it's not really special DNA as for that. Plants also have another organelle, another thing in their cells, which are called mitochondria. And mitochondria do the reverse of photosynthesis. So they take sucrose, it happens in our body, and they convert the sucrose by respiration to ATP, to energy. And so we sequence the Pongamia mitochondrial genome. It's much, much larger, and it has much, much fewer genes on it. It's not that we didn't look, there just simply are no genes. It's just simply random DNA. But it's useful to have that information, along with the information that we have from the DNA which is in the nucleus, in the chromosomes. And I'm not going to bore you with all the data and so on, but the bottom line is here that the number of sequences which we've isolated, which represent genes, so you can see greater than 2,000 base pairs, is about 31,000, 32,000, which is about the number of genes that you expect for a plant, right? It's the number of genes that we have. We have about 25,000 to 30,000 genes, right? So we have a supermarket. We can take whichever gene we want to and look at it and see how it's different between one ecological isolate and another one. So it's very, very, very valuable what we have there. So yes, to finish off, some broad calculations, which I think are very, very interesting. If you assume 500 Pongamia trees per hectare, which is a good number, 500, 600. And if you assume 20,000 seeds per tree, and if you assume about 2 grams of weight per seed at 40% oil content, then 1 hectare of Pongamia will produce 5 tons of oil per year. 5 tons of oil is a lot of oil. So therefore, if you, in Australia right now, the 2020 figures are that we use, baby, maybe, I can tell you. They're 2.4, it's coming? They're 2.4 times 10 to the 10. So it's 2.4 and 10 zeros afterwards, right? liters of diesel used in Australia every year, right? So therefore, if we would have a plantation which is 6 kilometers by 6 kilometers and use all of that area for Pongamia, and it's monoculture, I know, and maybe it's not the right way of doing it, but if you have that area, 36 square kilometers, we would need 200 plantations like that to satisfy all of Australia's diesel need. So it's very, very, very useful. I have the conclusions, but I think the conclusions are clear. We're at a transition point into the commercial application of all of this work, which started 17 years ago or so. And it's exciting for me to see the progress, not only in the science, but also in the ecology and the systems biology and the sociology and so on. So sadly, the last picture cannot be shown, but it's only text of the conclusions. But the major conclusion is that it's moving forward, and hopefully we will see more and more of it being established around the world. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for the questions. Thank you. Now my mouth is dry.
This is something that should help wake up.
Perfect.
You're lucky that I'm not an alcoholic.
Just pour it down into the roots.
Well, thank you very much.
The man at the shop said it was good, so I have to trust him.
Yeah, I get seduced. I'm a member of several wine clubs, like Wine Selector and so on, right? And they keep on sending you these fantastic deals, right? So instead of $26 a bottle, only $13.95, and so on. And it's so tempting to buy. Right? So my wine cellar is full of bottles, but the good bottles are all on the bottom. And when my grandchildren are there, I ask them to go to the basement. I live in a townhouse, so there's a basement area. I tell them to bring whatever wine, but not the bottom 3 lines. So they feel good.
So it's your own selection of biofuel.
Yeah. Well, again, if you do it in moderation, I think it's correct.
Is there any prospect of an alcoholic beverage made from Pongamia?
Yeah, probably, but more importantly, which I didn't speak about at all, but there's a lot of, Pongamia contains a lot of medicinal molecules. And so,
It is a gift.
it is a gift. I mean, just read up on it. I mean, go to the internet and, right? Yeah. So there's some wonderful drugs in it, yeah.
I noticed you had a plantation at Roma, but that's outside the ideal strip.
Yes,
So
because, well, it will grow there. I mean, we planted 300 hectares, but Origin Energy wanted to do that, right? But there are too many, as soon as you have hollows soak up the cold air, and the hollows just simply block the growth. And what happens, it doesn't kill the plant, but it reshoots as a bush, so it has multiple shoots. And that's not what you want, because you cannot shake it. Yeah.
Roma's no good.
No, it's the best area is from Brisbane going up north, Gladstone, Rockhampton,
Coast.
Atherton, Tableland. Yeah, so 50 kilometers inwards. Yeah.
And that's really important for the rehabilitation for the mining, and I imagine that can be one of those areas as well.
Yeah. Well, we've shown applications, and I mean, we've only looked at 5% of what can be done. I mean, there's so much more. The problem that we have right now is that nobody wants to give us money for real research, for laboratory research. Everybody wants to have the economic, whole real world, situation research. But that takes many years, and many years means many years of money. And so you need millions of dollars, but people don't want to give you millions of dollars for what looks like Mickey Mouse research. You weigh the seed and you count the seed. I mean, it's not high tech.
I know, Mitsubishi probably needs to invest in the R&D as well if they're going to reap the rewards to get the money back.
I just wanted to ask, what other problems have you faced so far? Which other issues? Like you said, hollows cause some troubles with.
Yeah, that's the major temperature, right? Is a major problem. The other problem, which is a wonderful result, but it's a negative result. It shows you that if you find out something negative, it actually can be positive, right? And I'm talking in riddles, right? But we found out that at South Johnson, which is the wet tropics, it's close to Innisfail, up north, and it rains up to 9 meters per year, 9,000 millimeters of rain. Absolutely amazing. Tully, right, is a very famous town close to it, and I think they hold the Australian record.
Cyclones.
Cyclones,
Is
yeah,
it
I come to
cyclones?
that as well. It's relatively strong, the tree, but a real cyclone will hurt it, right? But we planted at South Johnson, and the trees are growing wonderfully. They look healthy and fast growth and so on. But when we look over a 10-year period, so it's not only 1 year, 10-year period, looking at clonal trees and seed-derived trees, and I mean hundreds of them, only 3 out of those 10 years, the trees have seed. And that's the problem, right? And so we wanted to know why, under such perfect growth environment, do you have no seed production? Now, you may want to answer it anthropomorphically. You can say the tree is happy, you know, like why make babies, you know? I mean, this is wonderful, you know. But the clue came when we noticed that some of the trees had wonderful seeds, but there were always the trees at the northern end of the row, right? So the trees next to it didn't have it, you know, 20, 30 trees downward, no seed. But the tree at the end, at the northern end of the row. Now, what's special about the northern end of the row? It gets most of the direct sunshine, right? And why is that important? Sunshine dries things. And so in that area, right, Innisfail, it rains really heavily when it flowers. And bees don't fly when it rains. So therefore you have an absence of fertilization if your rainy period is during the flowering period. Now that's a real problem. So you have perfect country for everything, and your trees grow perfectly, but they don't produce seed. So you have to watch out. So it's a negative result, right? I mean, a failure to produce seed, but it ultimately is because of a failure to have efficient fertilization by bees. And so therefore, the trees which are at the northern end of the row, they get dried out by the sun, and so the bees can fertilize those and they have seed. Yeah.
Can you externally pollinate?
No, we tried.
And how long?
And just so that you realize how science works. I told you the flowers are only fertile for 3 weeks, right? So you have to do it inside 3 weeks. You don't have a whole year to do it, right? In order to externally fertilize, you have to emasculate, you have to remove the male parts of the mother flower, right? So you have to open it up and you snip off the anthers, right? And you come with the pollen from the supposed father, right? On a paintbrush, and you dip it on the top and so on, right? I had a wonderful Chinese student, Twingy Jiang, and he is perfectly suited for it, right mentality and fiddly little stuff and so on, right? But he never managed to get fertilization. And the reason is, well, there could be many reasons. Number one, the emasculation alone already puts so much stress on the flower that it doesn't want to be fertilized on the female parts, right? The second one, which is really important for me at least, is that Pongamia pollen is not granular pollen. Like, you probably never would get hay fever from Pongamia because it's a glug. It's just that all the pollen grains stick together. And so therefore you pick it up from the anther and then you fertilize it, and somehow it doesn't seem right. I think it has to be transferred by a bee, you know, in a small proportion, and brushed off the hair from the bee in order to fertilize. So we tried for 3 years in a row, but no success. But it would be, it's a very desirable thing if you could get sexual hybridization, right? So, but I mean, it probably happens in nature, and you probably can select for it, and especially because of DNA analysis. You know, you don't have to wait 4 years in order to see if the tree produces good seed or not.
Sorry, another question. How long do these trees live for?
How long do they what?
How long do they live for?
Oh, probably 100 years or so. I've seen trees with that kind of diameter, and 30 meters tall, and they still produce seed. I don't know how many because I couldn't look high enough, but there was seed lying underneath it.
Did you shake them?
No, no. I mean, unless you're Hercules or something. No, that's why. I mean, you've seen the shakers there. Realistically, these shakers can shake trees which are 20 years old, right? I mean, there's some pruning requirement and things like that, but 20 years is the limit, right? So you have about 15 years of production of the tree that you planted. And in many ways that makes sense because after 20 years from today, there will be better varieties. There will be better genetic material.
In the interest of time,
Yes.
I wasn't going to ask a question.
What is the time?
It's 4 o'clock.
Okay, well then, yeah. I have to walk back to the car too.
Yeah, you don't want to be in trouble.
No. Okay, well, thank you very much. If you have questions, please email me or make a date with me and we can meet for coffee or
Whereabouts on the Sunshine Coast?
Kalandra.
Oh, excellent. I'm in Budrum.